Well, good afternoon. Let's go ahead and start. I know there's some others coming, but our speaker has to leave quite promptly soon after 5, so let's give him maximum time. We're especially pleased to have Ambassador Marc Perrin de Brichambaut here to speak about the task facing his new organization, the OSCE, in the coming decades. Marc is a friend of many years. This is our first opportunity to welcome him to the Wilson Center. I'm especially pleased to do so. He's been the Secretary General of OSCE since June of 2005. Prior to that, he served for a number of years in the French Ministry of Defense as the Director for Strategic Affairs and as the Principal Advisor on Foreign and Security Affairs to the Minister of Defense. Prior to that, he also served in the Foreign Ministry's Legal Division as head of it and as the head of delegation to the then Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe in Vienna. He has served in earlier posts as the Principal Advisor to Defense Minister Jean-Pierre Chevènement, as Chief of Staff to Minister of Foreign Affairs Roland Dumas, and advisor to the Minister Claude Cheysson. He also has served at the United Nations and in the Conseil d'État. He's a graduate of the École Nationale d'Administration and widely regarded as one of France's top experts on security and defense affairs. He will speak today on Reinventing the OSCE for the New Century, the case for U.S. leadership. Marc, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you all for being here. I'm very impressed by this facility, new building. I envy you to be working in such an environment. We're not too bad in Vienna, but still. So you may have noticed that the OSCE has had some press this year. It's actually had a fairly bad press in the sense that the Russian President Putin in Munich recently raised his concerns with the path that OSCE has been taking over the years, and noted that some countries were seeking to transform the organization into a vulgar instrument of their own interest. Needless to say, it's highly embarrassing for me to be such a thing, but nevertheless, sometimes it's better to have a challenging press than to have no press at all. Because the OSCE doesn't get that much press. We have sort of dropped out of the radar screen of organizations and security organizations, perhaps because we are in a business which is not that attractive. We try to avoid crisis. We try to manage a few. And we are in the business of the long-term consolidation of democracy, of stability, of good governance, of human rights, acting basically on the ground through 19 field operations, which is where most of our resources are. So fortunately, we are making good progress along with the consent of our host countries. And this doesn't always get the credit I hope it would deserve. What I'd like to tell you first is that OSCE is not quite an institution like others. It is, in fact, a process. It remains very much the imprint of its origins, and it is a process which is in constant evolution and which is in a constant process of reinventing itself. This is why, as Sam kindly has reminded us, I have tried to focus my brief points today into how is OSCE reinventing itself. There was a first OSCE, which was a pioneering phase. Before and at the Helsinki Final Act, it was a loose conference. It was a forum to prevent conflict, to map out the outlines of new basic security concepts for the European continent. And this remains valid. The meeting every Wednesday of the ambassadors in the Security Forum is a testimony to the continued importance of the hard underlying facts of security within OSCE, as is the meetings of the 56 ambassadors every Thursday, an occasion where any participating states can raise any security issue of concern to itself. And they are widely varied, and they reflect the very broad scope of the definition of security in OSCE. It's cross-dimensional. It covers issues from hard security, political military issues, new threats, economic and environmental issues, the broad spectrum of human dimension issues, covering, of course, human rights, the democratic process, but also very many new areas in which OSCE has become involved, like organized crime, trafficking in human beings, fighting terrorism. And it has grown also into a family of institutions, which is important: the High Commission for National Minorities, the Director for the Freedom of the Media, and the Parliamentary Assembly, and the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, based in Warsaw, which is in many ways the most visible part of OSCE for most of you, because this is the moment where OSCE is involved after election day in the monitoring of elections, and provides an overall assessment. It doesn't say whether elections are fair, free, or not. It just says that in view of the overall process of preparing a set of elections, the conformity with the commitments which have been entered by the participating states in Copenhagen is more or less fulfilled. And this is a much richer and fuller of subtlety type of work than a sort of black or white clear-cut exercise. So this was all the heritage of the second phase of the OSCE, this brief moment in the early 1990s where there was consensus among the participating states of OSCE, where the whole of the former Soviet Union states became members of OSCE, and where we built and entered the basic standards and commitments which make OSCE special. This was a rather unique period in the history of Europe. It lasted, let's say, until about 94, 95. And then progressively it became to fritter a little bit, because the OSCE could not remain aloof from the difficulties that emerged on the continent, difficulties in the Balkans, obviously, and also the resurgence of tensions among its key members. But this period, the third period, was also a period where a lot was achieved that OSCE had opened the way for. The enlargement of NATO, the enlargement of EU, were testimony to the validity of the core values of the OSCE, which had made it possible for these movements to happen. So the Europe of today is quite different in many ways for what it has been in the past. And this is why I would like to, not to describe you what OSCE is doing today, because it is an open project, it is a work in progress. We should look at OSCE because it is value-based, because it is constantly interacting with different situations in Europe and outside Europe, as a project in the making, and therefore as a process which is in the process of reinventing itself to address current challenges. And what I would like to share with you is not the answers to questions, but the questions that are in front of us and are being addressed right now by the 56 participating states, which are difficult in many ways, and which make of this organization an organization perpetually in crisis, perpetually on the edge, because of the intrinsic difficulty of finding answers to some of the questions. First question I'd like to put across to you is very simple. How does one continue to encourage the consolidation of stability, of democracy, the transition, if I may say, in states which do not benefit from the leverage of having a prospect of becoming members of NATO or of the European Union? The last phase of the OSCE's life was a phase where a large number of states joined those two organizations. Whenever EU speaks now in Vienna, usually 35 countries align themselves with the chair of the EU. The 27 who speaks through the chair, plus the candidate countries, the countries who voluntarily align themselves it is quite a big block because it's the equivalent number to what used to be the whole of the OSCE membership, and it leaves only a limited number of countries outside, between 35 and 56. The OSCE is a sort of marriage of two ideas because, as I said, it is first a values-based organization that is built around standards and commitments, and those standards and commitments cover a uniquely ambitious range of issues, not only human rights, democratization, and stability, but many other areas where together, either in the spring of Europe or later on, those countries have signed documents in common, which are not binding documents, but which are nevertheless soft commitments for which they have a sort of reciprocal peer pressure way of addressing among themselves. And at the same time, the OSCE is based on the idea of inclusion. Everybody is an equal member, everybody is on an equal footing. No decision is taken unless it is taken by consensus, and I feel already shivers running across your spines. The discipline of a Security Council where everybody has a veto right is not necessarily catastrophic. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of listening to each other, it takes a lot of searching for compromise, a lot of adjustment, plenty of patience, but it does work. It does achieve results. And it is, over time, a way of ensuring positive inclusion and implementation of many of the standards and commitments. So what nevertheless comes out is that combining those two ideas requires a continued and sustained engagement by those countries who care about OSCE, which is of course, countries like the United States, although, as we all know, the enthusiasm for CSCE in 1975 was not that widely shared in Washington. There's this famous op-ed piece saying, Jerry, don't go. And Jerry did go to Helsinki. He did sign. And ever since, I think the OSCE has been an important element in U.S. Foreign policy, with its democratic and human rights dimension, to the point of irritating some presidents of some other OSCE participating states. But now that we have a large number of the participating states in NATO and in EU memberships, how do you encourage those countries which are not yet in those two big organizations to continue to work within OSCE in ensuring their orderly transition in Central Asia, in Caucasus, in Central Europe, in the Balkans? We've been in, OSCE has been in most of its field missions in the Balkans since either 1992 or 1999 for Kosovo. It has greatly helped in building together peace, democratic institutions, but the job is not finished, far from it. There is still a lot of imperfections, there's still a lot to do to build up the institutions, to change the mentalities, to create fresh approaches to think. We have an OSCE presence in 60 different locations in the Balkans right now, small and big cities. We are at the grassroots, municipal level, taking care of building up democracy, protecting minorities, ensuring that the ideal, which has been sort of the approach of the international community in the Balkans, that there should not be ethnically pure states, but multi-ethnic constructions, continues to be a possibility. You've understood that we are concerned about what will be the next steps regarding the Kosovo status. We would not be able to remain in Kosovo unless we had the full support of all our 56 participating states. That includes Russia and Serbia. Therefore, whatever developments happen in the course of the next months, we will determine our continued action and presence with all the participants, and we will need to continue to work with the trust of all components of the Kosovar population, the Kosovar Albanians, and the various minorities, not only the Kosovar Serbs, but the Turks, Roma, many others. which are present. This is not easy because the perspective of getting into the NATO and the EU is clearly on the horizon, but pretty far down the horizon. Second question, which I had to mention, and I realize I haven't provided you with any answers on the first question, except patience, engagement, and dialogue and mutual respect. The second question is really whether we still need, in the field of security, a regional forum of 56 participating states on 6 continents, which was at the initial inspiration of the OSCE, and at a time when maybe there are new factors of tensions which are emerging, and where there are increasingly needs for a forum to dialogue. I'm not trying to resurrect a function of Cold War, if I may say, but there is a legitimate question in whether the, I don't know, the NATO-Russia forum, for instance, or the conversations between the EU and Turkey, EU and Russia, completely fulfill the need for these things. We have every year an annual security review conference, which takes place this year in May. I fully expect the issue of the possible missile defense creations to be a major item during this conference, because they will be raised certainly by the Russian federations, and the rest of the participating states will react. There will probably not be a reaction of NATO as such, but there will be a discussion on many issues. Third question, and I would like to leave as much time as possible, of course, for discussions. OSCE cannot be strictly about a given set of values. There are, in all advanced societies and in all societies in transitions, many problems which crop up at a given moment, which are neither east or west of Vienna, and which are a common endeavor. And one of the things OSCE has been beginning to address, not yet successfully because they are extremely difficult subjects in the past years, has been the issues linked to tolerance, to non-discrimination, which are clearly, at least in Western European societies, very complicated issues. The fact that you have communities with different cultural backgrounds, which creates what the High Commissioner for National Minorities calls, with a certain amount of caution, new minorities. They are not national minorities, but they are new minorities with a clear, strong cultural character to them. And of course, the broader issues of non-discrimination, fighting against anti-Semitism, fighting against all forms of discriminations against Islam and discriminations against other religions, particularly Christianism. These are difficult areas. There are not many other organizations involved in this, and they are delicate. But there are other challenges apparent in our societies where OSCE has been called upon by its participating states to get involved. And you might be skeptical after hearing me enumerate some of them, but nevertheless, I can tell you there is a genuine desire to have a place where you can have a forum, where you can have enhancing awareness, determining new concepts, new forms of cooperation, giving impetus to the way, for instance, trafficking in human beings is being addressed, which is something that there is a particular interest from the US side into, in many forms of cooperation against terrorism, and particularly in the effective implementation of all the UN conventions on this issue. The Spanish chair currently attaches a lot of importance to fighting environmental risks, particularly water management, soil degradation, brings all its experience in this and has had quite a following. I can tell you I was recently in a conference in Spain on this issue. We had massive participation from Central Asia. They were interested in the subjects, and they were represented at quite a high level. So OSCE in this sense is developing as a sort of very flexible framework where new ideas are explored, debated, and then they are moved on to other fora. which sort of do the follow-up and the implementation. And it couldn't work unless all participating states were ready to play ball, send experts, discuss honestly and seriously issues. Inevitably, climate change is going to come. I'm sorry to announce it because now everybody is involved in climate change. But we have annually a forum, an economic and environmental forum in Prague, and my good colleague, Dr. Snoir, which is running this unit, wants to bring some experts there, not the same ones as you will of course see in all the media. But therefore, there is a question: do we want to continue to do this? Should we refocus? How do we address this variety of concerns, which are all rooted in text? None of it is arbitrary. They all have strong connections to the acquis of the OSCE basic values and commitments. First question, which I'd like to put to you, which is my last one, is the question of whether it makes sense to transform at one stage OSCE into an institution. OSCE has no charter, it has no legal personality. It has an agreement with the Austrians to host it, and it is a non-career organization where most of the people who have contracts cannot serve more than 7 or 10 years, and not very many people have contracts. Most people are seconded by participating states. In the field operations, practically nobody has contracts except some local contracts. All the internationals are seconded by participating states. So this is very unusual. There is no bureaucracy. This creates problems of memory. It does create problems of quality. It sort of creates problems also of geographic and gender balance, because I perpetually get under pressure for getting better gender balance, but if I work with seconded personnel, I can only take whoever is seconded to me, usually, and whatever I do to straighten the balance, it's still far from perfect. So I hope you will have understood that there is a lot to do. But this is a genuine problem, because if we want OSCE not to be a sort of incarnation of a brief and felicitous moment of unanimity in European history of the 90s, but a tool which will continue to be relevant to work throughout the 21st century, a minimum of continuity and solidity is useful. And I'm not saying this in order to convince any American in the audience, but the US happens to be the country most reluctant to believe that there should be any form of institutionalization, partially because the greatest advocate of institutionalization is, guess who, the Russian Federation, which would like to have a real solid institution with a charter, with a bureaucracy, and with a Secretary General they can exercise a lot of pressure on in order to put across some of the points of view. I know there is a Russian among you, so I say this in a purely pragmatic mode and with no value judgment involved at all. So these are a few of the problems. As you see, values, current challenges, and institutional issues are inevitably fully mixed in the life of an institution. We cannot avoid touching one without addressing others. But what we do need is continued U.S. leadership, and not a leadership from the U.S. alone, but U.S. leadership and commitment, because the situation is complex enough, because values are something the U.S. cares about, and everybody would be skeptical if one had a feeling the U.S. was less interested or less supportive. And the U.S. support is not only a matter of budgetary contributions or seconding personnel. It's a matter of political engagement. It's a matter of providing ideas. It's a matter of participating in the constant process of reinventing the organization. And of course, it's a major question. There is occasionally a tendency, I feel, in the U.S. to say, well, we've done our duty as far as Europe is concerned. We're moving to other pastures, perhaps not so green, but we have to do other things. Why don't the EU take care of it? Well, it's a serious question, and I would like to hear your answers to it, but basically the job is not finished because the success of the OSCE as a project, which also still requires an enormous amount of work and dedication, would set an incredible example for the rest of the regional organizations around the world. The OSCE is a very ambitious project. It will not be achieved easily, but if it were to be achieved, it would mean that there would be a very strong commonality of values and behavior among the 56 participating states on 3 continents. This would be quite a nucleus for the global community altogether. And in this sense, I think the OSCE is part of a broader picture. Achieving such an ambitious project, which will certainly go beyond the lifetime of most of us, including myself, nevertheless requires a lot of continuity and political will, and will not be achieved without this American commitment throughout. So these were a few thoughts, Sam, to get the conversation started. I'm at your disposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marc. That's very good. Well, let me ask that you identify yourself before posing a question or making a comment, and we'll start with Andrew Pierre.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Ambassador to Brichambaut, for your expose and depth. But you mentioned simply in passing missile defense. And with your enormous background in strategic affairs, would you sort of give us a little tour d'horizon with respect to missile defense? Do you see it as a increasingly sensitive, important issue in the years ahead? Is it a very divisive issue? And obviously, I would think that OSCE would not be at the center of it, but nevertheless will have a role to play, as you said. So I'd be interested in your general tour d'horizon of missile defense as a European issue and a European-American issue in the coming years, let's say. My second question has to do with, well, the invitation today said, reinventing the OSCE for the new century, quote, semicolon, the case for U.S. leadership. I don't know whether Sam Wells had put that in or not, but I noticed in the paper that you have that the case for U.S. leadership is no longer in the title. And I'd be interested, you talked about a U.S. commitment, but you also talked about U.S. leadership. And do you feel that the United States can, in the world of today, or should exercise leadership within an organization which is essentially a European, broadly based organization? I mean, what is the appropriate role of the United States, apart from missile defense?
Shall I try and answer that?
It'll take at least 45 minutes each.
I'd be rather short on missile defense because I feel I'm a little bit outside of my field of competence, and we could have a good discussions among us. I have some ideas about the issue, but anyway, I'm going to tell you I'm happy that it has not struck OSCE so far, and I know it's going to, well, it will be a fact of life. In the sense that so far the Forum for Security Cooperation never had to deal with missile defense issues, over if I may say, the long story of the concept. Maybe I was absent in the 80s when the debate started, but at least in recent time it was not addressed. And I think if it is going to be addressed, like I expect it to be, it's a absolutely natural phenomenon. If there is among the participating states of OSCE one of them which feels strongly that this is something of concern to it and that it intends the issue to be addressed and debated, this is a legitimate procedure. It will be up for the other participating states to determine how they want to address it, whether they want to address it as a group or whether they want to address it as individuals, and in what perspective they intend to put it. I am not sure it will raise that much passion in an OSCE context, to be honest. I think there will be a serious exchange. A few experts will come from capitals, and that will be it. There is, correct me, probably not much scope for negotiating a treaty within OSCE about this, or I would be very surprised if anybody were interested. There is no direct confidence and security building measure that addresses this issue at this stage. Maybe there could be. Maybe some additions to the Vienna document might be appropriate. But I would believe that it would be quite difficult to create a consensus on this. So I'm sorry to disappoint you on the first question. The second question, I did highlight that leadership, among other leaderships, of course, it was not single U.S. leadership. And sometimes people tell me that everything I'm saying in one country I could repeat in another country. And indeed, everything I've said regarding U.S. leadership I could say about Russian leadership. It would have a probably slightly different undertone, but why not? The importance about OSCE is that people engage in the development and implementation of the standards and commitments they serve. And the U.S. has a particular role in this respect, of course, and a strong one. And I think whatever the difficulties of one moment, there is absolutely no reason at any moment any of the participating states cannot come up with their own views, with their own ideas, and debate them with the other ones. It may not be an instant success. There is a process of discussing things within OSCE, which is in many ways very frustrating. I mentioned the cycle of creating awareness, having debates, identifying concepts, identifying plans of action. OSCE is one big machinery to create consensus. That requires a lot of repetition. That requires a lot of saliva, exchanges of papers. And nevertheless, it works. We just are working on a number of examples right now, whether it's the control of the trafficking of small arms and light weapons by air, or very concrete issues in the field of legal instruments in order to enhance cooperation against terrorism. They take time. It's a bit of a grinding machine. You have to involve capitals. The diplomats in Vienna can't do it on their own, but it works. So there is plenty of scope for U.S. initiatives, as there are from initiatives from other countries. And tomorrow is always the first day.
Thank you. Dieter Detke?
Thank you. Dieter Detke, Wilson Center. Just to spice up our discussion a little bit, because it seems to me that the question for U.S. leadership at this particular time sounds to me as there is something lost. The cause of CSCE and OSCE is lost somehow. And let me put it in these categories, please, if you don't mind. And maybe you can not only answer as a diplomat but also as a historian. Isn't it true that the best days of OSCE, CSCE at the time were really when there was a Cold War, when there was a need to bridge East and West and to create common institutions? And now that we don't have a wall, we don't have an East-West conflict, we don't have bipolarity, that somewhere, there is no real need for a CSCE to bridge this gap between East and West. So isn't that the real problem, that somehow OSCE has no real mission anymore? And that in contrast to NATO. I mean, NATO could exist because it was not a bridge builder. It was a defense alliance, and it was very successful and proved to be even successful beyond the fall of the wall. But isn't that the crux of OSCE's problem, that the real cause for having an OSCE is gone?
Yes, well, let me answer this. I think you have a point. It's always more exciting to live in drama and to be at a crucial moment of history when there is a drastic change to be made. But and this is why I said OSCE has been already reinventing itself several times. So it did contribute to the end of the Cold War. To what percentage, it's very hard to say, but nevertheless it played a role. But I think it's perfectly valid and exciting to be doing the sort of things we are doing now, which nobody pays attention to, training riot police in Bishkek, observing elections in Armenia, helping the judiciary in Skopje in Bosnia-Herzegovina, trying to build up local democracy in Kosovo, setting standards and good practices for police forces and trying to implement anti-terrorism conventions. This is a different type of activity. It clearly reflects another approach, less dramatic, less emphatic, to problems of society, but which over time are equally quite important. So I don't feel frustrated by not having OSCE in the midst of the action, trying to sort of bridge big gaps. The fact that we don't have big gaps of that sort right now is in itself a very positive thing, but we have many, many small gaps. And so many of them, in fact, that I would be very hard put to say when and how we would have a perspective of having bridged most of them. So that's also a very, very valuable task. And that's also, by the way, a task that is interesting and challenging for the U.S., I would say.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. My name is John Sandrock. I now work with Analytic Services Incorporated. I very much enjoyed your talk, and Dieter, I think the most exciting time for the OSCE was when I was with the OSCE from 1995 through 2001. There was a tremendous amount of growth during those years, and I am kind of the self-styled most enthusiastic advocate of the OSCE in Washington. I really am. Every time I have a chance, I am a spokesperson, spokesman, and so on. Which leads me to one of the comments. I think one of the reasons that it amazes me, I should say, it amazes me how few people in this town who should know what the OSCE is all about actually know what OSCE stands for. I don't mean the principles and the traditions, but what the letters OSCE stand for. When you talk about OSCE, there's nothing there. You get it glazed over, then you have to explain. I do this almost every day in different forums. I think what we have is the OSCE has a publicity issue, a publicity problem. And one of the things I would recommend for your consideration is to, not only in the United States but also in other places, is to select a group of OSCE champions. And I volunteer. No, I'm serious about this. I think the OSCE is not well understood, certainly not in the United States. I think it's much better understood in Europe, where there's a much longer tradition, where there's been a chance to discuss it in a much greater form and much more often. But I think there is something here that needs to be done, and needs to be done very badly, because the OSCE is an excellent institution. It does many, many things, and you've outlined them. I'm not going to repeat them, obviously, that are under the radar, that do not make the headlines on a daily basis. But as I used to tell my staff in Vienna, if I stomp my foot, I keep the elephants away. And the OSCE is stomping its foot and keeping the elephants away. Now, you can't prove that conflict prevention ever really prevents a conflict. You can't prove that scientifically, analytically, and so on, but there is a huge, huge value to the OSCE that is as relevant today as I believe, as it was in the early 1990s, when there was in fact a very visible conflict prevention role. When you talk about Bosnia, when you talk about Albania in 1997, which was my first field mission, where Jean-Claude Aragona sent me on literally 2 hours' notice to Tirana to assist in the process. I was a member of an EU team at that point to look at the issues. That was 2 days after the government fell in March 1997, and so on. And I'm waxing on here a little bit, but I also wanted to raise a specific point, and that I wonder what your reaction to that would be. The other night, we had a meeting with the foreign minister from Azerbaijan, Mr. Mamadiyarov, and the question came up. In fact, I asked the question. He said, what is the future of the Minsk process? Because it's been going on forever, and maybe it's time to take it out of the OSCE's hands. And I said that in a self-serving kind of way, because I expected that I would get the answer that I got, which was that 3 of the 5 permanent members of the security councils are on the Minsk process. That's the people. And if they can't resolve the issue or assist in resolving the issue, then who can? And my question really is, I'd like you to comment on everything that I'm saying as you feel so moved, but in particular, I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that progress on issues such as what's going on with Nagorno-Karabakh and between Armenia and Azerbaijan, these are not issues that can be resolved overnight. They are long-term issues that need constant attention. But I wonder if you wouldn't have some ideas as to how that process can be speeded up, how the interaction over Transnistria with Moldova, how the problems with South Ossetia and Abkhazia can be better addressed, to re-energize those issues and get them more into the vernacular. There are a lot of people who don't have a clue what I'm talking about, and I would guess there were probably a few even in this room who are obviously here because of the OSCE interest. These issues need to be raised. They need to be raised again and again, and we need to push for them. Sorry to give you a monologue, but like I say, I am one of the most enthusiastic, perhaps the most enthusiastic supporter of the OSCE in this town.
Well, thank you very much for the challenge. Let me say the following thing. I didn't mention frozen conflicts, which are very much part of the remit of OSCE, and not the most rewarding. And I'm going to sound less enthusiastic than you and perhaps a little bit cynical. But there is one thing better than war, which is a sort of prolonged stalemate. And what Minister Mamadiyarov may not have told you, but what all the people who are involved in those frozen conflicts tend to say, once you've discussed things with them over time, is, well, conditions are not ripe to move towards an agreement, but we want the process to continue. Sure. And this is the common factor of all the frozen conflicts. The processes are continuing in Transnistria, in South Ossetia, and in Nagorno-Karabakh, which is by far the most difficult. It's not entirely an empty sentence. There have been 14 casualties on the contact lines in Nagorno-Karabakh over the last year. The two armies are ready to move to a war footing overnight, and they have a little sniping war going on. They have bought modern sniping rifles, which can kill somebody at 2 kilometers, and they exercise themselves on each other, which means that the situation is far from stabilized and full of confidence in other ways. So there were 2 Georgian policemen which were shot in South Ossetia on Saturday. So they're frozen, but with a certain degree of temperature occasionally. Each of those conflicts has its own profile. Each are basically leftover bits of the disaggregation of the Soviet Union. Let's say that in order for the political will to be guaranteed that would help them move forward, there would have to be significant changes in more than one actor, certainly in one key actor, which is a common factor to all the frozen conflicts, but also to the other actors. And right now, if you look at Nagorno-Karabakh, it's not obvious that it is in the interest of Azerbaijan to be seeking a solution. Azerbaijan feels it is getting richer by the day, almost by the hour, that it will have all the money necessary to build up a big army, and while Armenia is getting poorer by the day, that the young Armenians are leaving the country, and that sooner or later they will not even have to bend to get the prize back. So it's very tricky, very frustrating, and endless. But the participants in all those conflicts have one factor in common. they believe it is in their interest to keep the process of discussions going. So I may sound cynical, but I may be not quite as cynical as they are.
Other questions, comments? Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Tatyana Verushka, and I'm with Ukrainian Service of Voice of America, and my questions will be pertaining to Ukraine, if you don't mind that. The first question, what is, in your opinion, the biggest accomplishment for OSCE in general and for OSCE in Ukraine? And if you don't mind, I'll continue with my questions after that one.
May I have an overview before I get started?
Yes.
Of your questions?
Oh, okay, I can do that if you don't mind. Okay, the other questions is, again, about the subject of anti-missile defense. And I guess, as you're aware, on March 22nd, the Ukrainian parliament voted the resolution, the draft resolution, which states that the placement of U.S. anti-missile defense in Eastern Europe constitutes a danger to the national security of Ukraine, and it is expected that early April this resolution will be voted as a law. And in your opinion, which repercussions will it have for OSCE addressing the problem? The other question is, widely in Ukraine, the issue of having elections ahead of a scheduled one is discussed. And do you think, what's our OSCE position in that? Will ODIHR will be up to the challenge, because this will be a challenging thing? And the last question, if you don't mind having like an interview. After the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, there were plenty of rumors that the Ukrainian mission, so-called OSCE project coordinator in Ukraine, will be closed. They'll not be any longer because the situation has stabilized. And now, after the change of power in the country, there are no such talks anymore. And does it mean that OSCE estimates the situation in nowadays Ukraine as less stable and less democratic? Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are some questions you will not be surprised if I don't answer. I don't deal with internal Ukrainian politics. First of all, because I shouldn't. Second, because I'm not sure I understand them.
Two very good reasons.
Nevertheless, there are other questions which are perfectly legitimate. As you know, during the difficult moments of the so-called Orange Revolution, there were a number of mediators which were present in Kiev and which helped facilitate the positive outcome of the crisis, which was basically the holding of a third round of elections. My predecessor, Jan Kubic, was one of them, and with one of the Ukrainian staff members on our staff. And I think when you see the pictures of all the mediators around the round table, he played a significant and useful role, and we were happy to be present as facilitators and to help in a process which evolved very peacefully. As you know, following the third round of elections, of presidential elections, there were legislative elections about a year later. Between the presidential and legislative elections, we were in charge of spending about 5 million euros, which were donated by the European Commission, by the US, by Canada, by Norway, to ensure that none of the faults in the electoral system which had been identified during the Orange Revolution would recur. This was an enormous work because it included the computerization of the whole voters register and the setting up of a network of facilities all over the country. This was done within a year, was a great achievement, and allowed the latest elections to have been not the object of any controversy within Ukraine or outside Ukraine. And I think this in itself is quite a success story for the Ukrainians first, but also for OSCE, which was involved in ensuring that support. Beyond that, I don't think having an OSCE office involved in providing support for programs and projects is a sign that a country is either not democratic or not developed. It is just a sign that there is a feeling of solidarity among OSCE members who are willing to share resources and expertise in order to help one of their partners move ahead on the basis of the programs he determines himself. So, in fact, our presence in Kiev is very unusual. There are only 3 international staff. There are 97 extremely brilliant, brash, young Ukrainians who are on the 5th floor. You know, whenever I visit them, I'm not quite sure what's going on there. It's a former facility of the city of Kiev. There's a barber shop. There's all sorts of things. But they're doing a great job, and they manage about 10 million euros worth of extra budgetary contributions every year, along with the respective Ukrainian ministries. I'm worried because if something goes wrong in the accounting, I'm accountable to the participating states. But so far, every time I send them auditors and so on, the auditors come back quite happy. So I see no reason to worry or to consider that this is not a recognition of the progress of Ukraine. Then the Ukrainians have to write their own history. It's not for us to tell them how it's going to move. I just certainly, like you, hope that the next elections in Ukraine, when they happen, if they happen, will be according to the full democratic standards which are written into OSCE. That's our job, to make sure that we can help the Ukrainians achieving this. And the best way to achieve this is to have a lively democratic culture in Ukraine. Parties, a press, a feeling that it makes a difference to vote, and that the issues at stake are properly explained, and that the voting will be fair and free. This is not easy in any country. We all have to work to make it possible in Ukraine.
Well done. Yes, Mary? You can,
My name is Mary Mullen.
it'll pick up. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Mary Mullen. I work with the Bosnia Support Committee, but I was wanting to ask you about Belarus. Is Belarus part of the OSCE, and what type of plans do you have in helping Belarus be more democratic, or do you?
Yes, Belarus is part of the OSCE. President Lukashenko is one of my bosses on an equal footing with President Bush. There is actually an OSCE presence in Minsk. And this OSCE presence is invited to provide assessments, which it does, to the 56 participating states in Vienna. I can assure you that the Belarusian delegations looks at every word and comma in whatever is distributed to participating states, but that nevertheless those texts are distributed and are of great interest to all. And Belarus is a very active participant in the debate. When the presidential elections took place in Belarus, when was it? Remind me, in March. The Belarusians invited ODIHR. There were 479 election monitors on the day of the elections, more than they had to take. When the ODIHR produced its report on the Belarusian elections, there was a professional, serious debate in the Permanent Council about the improvements which had to be made, the shortcomings during the process. The Belarusian delegation, which is extremely professional, went to great lengths to explain what were the improvements which they were in the process of making. In other words, it's not like if they are behaving as an outcast. They are fully participating within the rules. You may have noticed which does not mean that they're perfect, understand me well. Yesterday there were 15,000 people demonstrating in the streets of Minsk. The demonstration was broken up. A few people were jailed, but the demonstration took place.
Well, may I say something else?
Please.
I was at Radio Free Europe during that election at just a hearing or a meeting, and they were speaking during the election, and during there was some demonstration there at that time, and the representative in Belarus was explaining what was happening and how ambassadors from Western European countries were out in the streets showing that they were in support of the people of Belarus and so forth. So I didn't think that the that election was as, you seem to feel as though it was a very free and...
No, I'm just telling you the Belarusians accepted that the election be observed. They accepted to discuss the conclusions. The conclusions of the ODA mission on the Belarusian election were extremely critical, and very harshly so. And this is a public document. You can find it on our website. So I'm just trying to highlight that being a member of OSCE is a complex relationship, and that nevertheless people out of respectability feel bound to make certain efforts. And this has protected individual Belarusians. And individual Belarusians are probably better off because of the presence of Ambassador Peterson in Minsk, which travels all over the country, which is in touch with all forces of society, and which visits people in jail, and which has been extremely brave and dedicated in doing this job. So it's, and he's there. The Belarusian authorities accept him there. He's free to move around.
Tom. Jerry?
I would like to ask you to describe a little bit more how your organization actually functions. You say there's no charter. How do you gain a consensus? Is it by written vote or by hand vote or just by, as sometimes the EU Council of Ministers gains a consensus in a private discussion in a way which is not public? And once you have a proposal to act on an issue or a plan, how is that implemented? Is that your decision to appoint somebody to implement it? And also, do you advocate personally a charter for the OSCE?
One actor which I should have highlighted a little more because he is represented here is the chairman in office. There is for each year one country which takes responsibility to politically steer the country, and therefore chairs the meetings of the Permanent Council, prepares the agenda, and really makes all the key political decisions, and authorizes the press releases, very practical things. So right now it's Spain, and the Secretary General is there in support of the chairman in office. Basically, I have a few autonomous responsibilities, but my main responsibility is to help the chairman in office fulfill his duties. And how does the chairman in office create consensus? Well, the chairman in office creates consensus by endlessly consulting, by being extremely dedicated and patient, and then when he realizes there will be no opposition to a given proposal, he puts it to a series of meetings that confirm it. The ambassador of Spain in Vienna right now would tell you that he has on average 15 meetings a day, and that the last time he saw his wife was 2 weeks ago, more or less. It's very demanding, and it's a great effort on the country that holds the presidency, but this is the price of running such a complex organization altogether.
And you care not to comment on your views about a charter?
No, yes. To be honest, I'm a bureaucrat. I would love to have a charter. It would make my life much more comfortable in many ways, and it would make the life of the people who work with me more comfortable because they would have more stability and more predictability. I can't guarantee my own staff that we're not going to be out of a job if the next budget is not adopted. And 1 year out of 2, we have no budget adopted in the normal time frame because there's a political fight going on. This year it was adopted on the 20th of January, but the penultimate year it was adopted in May. So, you know, bureaucrats hate unpredictability. We are thoroughly comfortable people, and we would very much like to know how long we will last.
Please join me in thanking Ambassador Verushka for very good presentation. Cheerleaders here, so that's good.
I don't mind if you want it. It's all right with me.
Thank you very much. I'm from Russia now.
I hope I did not say anything that shocks you.
No, everything is quite friendly.
My regards to Ambassador Sheffer.
Oh, yeah.
We were together in 1994
He's one of the founders of the transition from CSC to the OSCE.
This is when
who is now is the head of the
It's very frustrating. I was the Russian leadership.
Case for Russian leadership.
If you look at the thank you very much. Yes.
I just wanted to thank you for all this kind estimate of Ukraine office because I just left the office a week ago.
Really?
So I'm very
So you were part of the 97 people on the 5th floor? And you had a good time.
Yeah, it was a great time.
Well, thank you for your great involvement. Thank you very much. It's good.
Actually, you should recognize the name.
Yes. Were you ambassador?
Well, I started out in Brichambaut. I was for 15 months, that was 95, 96, as the acting head of mission for 6 months and a deputy. I was seconded by the U.S. But I was in the Secretariat for 5 years. I started under Giancarlo and then Yankovic, of course.
We didn't know about it until after outings. Well, good.
He and I still, even though he's not a foreign minister, he and I still correspond. So,
He was at the ball.
yeah, very
Thank you for that.
No, it's going to be on, it should be able to in the paper. It's pioneers of your
Peter, so nice to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. You should have my new coordinates. Because I'm no longer, now I left the council last night, actually April, almost a year. Thank you, and I'm glad I'm not there anymore. No, I tell you, I enjoyed it.
Well,
I don't know, for some reason this young lady wants to interview, I'm not quite sure why.
Oh, all right, all right. But it's good to know that you have the great support of
Absolutely.
Good to see you.
Yes, good to see you.
In touch.
Yeah, by all means. And you're here now at the Wilson Center. Okay. What are you going to do with me?
pretty much opportunity to say
Right.
table, yeah, to have a right frame for that. The major question is how well the OSCE foreign special countries and all the people involved in foreign policy are aware of OSCE.
Well, I think the official, certainly the State Department office, which is very cognizant of and keeps track of the OSCE and what it's doing.